But this area would have been the place, most likely, where Pilate took Jesus. All right, the question we're trying to discover here is, where was Jesus tried before Pilate? It's likely that Pilate, when he came to Jerusalem, rather than staying in Caesarea Maritime, where you would if you were the head honcho, because it's right on the Mediterranean, when you came to Jerusalem, where would you stay? Would you stay in the palace that King Herod had built, which scholars almost universally agree is right on the other side of this wall, up toward that corner near the Jaffa Gate? Or would you stay in the Antonia Fortress down near the temple? You would stay in the palace. Now, we were just in the parking lot on the other side of this wall, and the reason I was so annoyed is because they paved over Roman era 1st century mosaics that probably were part of Herod's temple. Jesus may have actually stood on those mosaics. We're going to put in the show notes of this video the video from Joel Kramer, who shows you this cutout in the parking lot. As Ellie said, it used to just be a garden, just grass, green grass like this, and then they began to excavate it in order to put a parking lot in, and they discovered the mosaic. And instead of leaving it open, which would have made sense, we need a few more spots for cars. All right? So, Josephus, the Jewish historian, said Herod built a palace and its walls were 45 feet high. Okay?
This is the old city of Jerusalem. From 1973 to 1978, the old city's western wall was excavated from Jaffa Gate to the southwestern corner where the wall turns east. This excavation was directed by Israeli archaeologist Magen Broshi.
See how those masonry is white, and then right almost when you get to the arrow slot it turns dark. The soil level before excavations went all the way up to just below that arrow slot. And my professor, Shimon Gibson, he used to put his lunch in that arrow slot when they were doing this dig.
That's how much dirt and debris were here that they had to excavate. Now, when they excavated it away, they realized there was a gate. That's the gate right behind you here. This is the gate that scholars believe was the western gate to Herod's temple. Why would he have a western gate? Because if the populace, which was on the other side of this, rebelled against him, he would have an escape. He would be able to come out of this area and escape into the countryside. Remember, none of this was here back 2,000 years ago. This was the city. So, when they excavated all this and they found that gate, they also noticed a set of steps that went nowhere, right into a wall. Why would you have steps going into a wall? You wouldn't. When the wall was here, this was an opening. But when Suleiman the Magnificent came in the 1500s and rebuilt these walls, they didn't take the steps out, they just kept building up the wall. Because remember, when the Romans came in 70 AD, they destroyed much of this. Much of that debris was probably the debris that Shimon Gibson and his more senior archaeologists had to clear away in the 1970s to discover all this. They also found a bema seat. What's a bema seat? It's the place where the governor, whoever was in charge, would sit in judgment of the accused. You know what the bema seat is now? There it is. It's just knocked over. It might be that piece right there, or it might be this piece over here. But archaeologist Joel Kramer was here, and you'll see in the video, the bema seat used to be up in this area, and it got knocked over. So when you're looking at this area right here, what you're looking at was a entryway into the palace, then another gate, and this area would have been the pavement. They've ripped up most of the pavement. Let's see if we can find any of the original steps to the pavement. Here's more steps here. Possibly in this area there are a couple of tiles still left, but in Joel's video, which you will see, he points out that when archaeologists came in here, one of the problems with archaeology is they tend to destroy stuff, right? They want to see what's under, so they rip up the pavement. But this area would have been the place, most likely, where Pilate took Jesus and put him before the Bema seat. And so where were the Jews standing? Outside here. And he would say, shall I release Barabbas? And they would say no. And they would say what? Who do we want? We want you to crucify Jesus. Crucify him. Why should I do that? Why should I crucify him? They don't answer. They just say, crucify him. And then, as Mark records, it says that Pilate said this, or Pilate thought this, wanting to satisfy the crowd, he released Barabbas and ordered Jesus to be crucified. Wanting to satisfy the crowd. How many of us have wanted to satisfy the crowd rather than decided to do what's right? If there's one thing the murder of my friend Charlie Kirk has maybe woken people up to, is the fact that we've got to stop trying to satisfy the crowd. We have to speak the truth and leave the results to God. Because you know what? You're going to be dead a lot longer than you're going to be alive. So, are you ready to give up your life for the truth, or are you just going to hide the truth so you can live a few extra years here on earth? That's the biggest question, isn't it? Are you going to deny yourself and follow him? Or are you going to want to satisfy the crowd and just keep your mouth shut to get along? That's not why God put you here. So let me see if I missed anything. Because I think this site, by the way, isn't known by most people. For years it's been taught that the area that Jesus was crucified in was in the Antonia Fortress, or not crucified, but put on trial, was in the Antonia Fortress on the other side of the city. But why would Pilate be in the Antonia Fortress when he could be in the palace? Also notice that Luke says that they commandeered Simon of Cyrene to carry Jesus' cross as Simon was coming in from the country. If you're on the other side of the city, you're not coming in from the country. If you're on this side of the city, you are coming in from the country if you're coming in from this direction, from the west. So right from this gate here, they see Simon and they commandeer him to carry Jesus' cross as he heads to what we now call the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which at the time was outside the city walls. Right now it's inside the city walls. But at the time, in 33 AD, it was outside the city walls, and it was in a garden, the area where Jesus was crucified. Remember in the Garden of Gethsemane the other day, and we talked about the garden motif? That the world started in a garden, and then Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, deciding not my will, but your will. And then he was taken to another garden for the sacrifice, which opened up the ability for us to make it to the ultimate garden, heaven. Yeah, this stuff just isn't literally true, it's literarily true. So this was the area that Jesus was tried, most likely, right where you're standing. There used to be pavement here. It was part of the Bema seat, the judgment seat, and that gate right there was the likely gate that went to the west, where they picked up Simon of Cyrene and had him take Jesus' cross. By the way, no extra charge for this. Do you know that we found Simon of Cyrene's son's ossuary? the son of Simon. Yeah, that's to celebrate right there. I think it was found in the Kidron Valley, right on the other side of the old city. In 1941, they found a ossuary, a burial box that said, Alexander, son of Simon of Cyrene. First of all, what's Cyrene? Cyrene is what we now call Libya. How many Simons from Libya do you think were in Jerusalem about this time and had a son named Alexander? Probably not many. In fact, we've discovered 7 names associated with the crucifixion in the dirt. Jesus, found in several places, including his brother James's ossuary. His ossuary said, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Very unusual to mention the brother, unless he's really important. We found Peter in the dirt. We'll see him when we go to Capernaum. We found Herod in coins. We found Pilate in coins, stamps, and in an inscription found at Caesarea Maritime, and of course he's mentioned by Josephus. We found Simon of Cyrene in that ossuary. We found Annas' tomb. That's the tomb we went to the other day. You guys couldn't go, but we were right near it in the field of blood. And there's one other I can't remember right now, but we found 7 names in the dirt, all associated with the crucifixion of Jesus from the 1st century.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Kind of provocative one. I've heard some people try to say that Jews killed Jesus. Could you respond to that?
Well, some Jews wanted him dead, quite obviously.
Yeah.
But Pilate is the only one that had the authority to kill Jesus. In fact, at one point, Pilate says to Jesus, don't you know they have the authority to kill you? And what did Jesus say? He said, no, you don't. No, he said, yeah, you do, but you get that authority from above because God has delegated capital punishment to governments, legitimate governments. They couldn't kill Jesus, but Pilate could. So they instigated the death through Pilate. And why is it more likely that Pilate really did this in about 33 AD? Because an associate of Pilate by the name of Janus in about 31 AD was acting like the Caesar while the Caesar, Tiberius, was on vacation somewhere. And when Tiberius got back, he really didn't like what Janus had done. And so Caiaphas, I should say Pilate, was on a short leash. He was already probably looked at with suspicion by Caesar, and he didn't want the locals here in Jerusalem to give a bad report back to Caesar about Pilate's behavior. So what is Pilate trying to do? He's trying to satisfy the crowd to save his own neck. So it wasn't the Jews that officially killed him. Some of them wanted him dead, obviously, but it was the Romans who had the authority to do so, and they went along with what the Jews wanted. People always say when you read the New Testament, you can't trust it because you're reading Christian sources. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why? Because they're all Jews, okay? They're all Jews. They all originated as Jews. Why did they become Christians? They didn't believe a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. They didn't believe one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They had no expectation of this. And then suddenly, after he's brutally murdered, a couple of days later, and then, of course, later after Pentecost, they go from these scared, scattered, skeptical disciples to suddenly the most powerful, peaceful missionary force that the world has ever known. They suffer torture. They suffer martyrdom for something that never happened. Why would they do this? They wouldn't. All of the Christian sources in the New Testament are really Jewish sources that have become Christians because of what they witnessed. There are no Christian sources. They're all Jewish sources. Now, there are Christian sources later when you get to early church fathers. We all understand that. But those people were Jews who recognized that an event took place. Christianity did not begin with a book. It began with an event, the resurrection of Jesus. And that's why those scared, scattered, skeptical Jewish people suddenly became Christians because of what they witnessed, not because of a book they read. Because there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written. They wrote it down later. In fact, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. So when you're reading those documents, you're reading people that were eyewitnesses or new eyewitnesses of the events that took place, including right where you're standing.